Everybody, it's Friday. Oh dear, I know that doesn't mean a great deal to those of you who, and those of us that are working more like 7 days a week at the moment. But there's something a little bit glorious about the name of a Friday. So I'm sticking to that. I don't know about the rest of you. So good morning and welcome to our daily live stream here on Facebook from myself. I'm Bronwyn Pearson. I'm from Pinnacle People Solutions, and we provide customized, fit for purpose services in HR. So, packaged services as well as fit for purpose strategies for those who need it. We specialise in supporting regionally based small to medium sized businesses and not for profit organisations, and we are here to help you. As we have been doing for quite a number of years now, and thoroughly enjoy to do so. It's really challenging times at the moment with COVID, and in fact, that's kind of reflected in today's topic, which is what if it's all too hard? So we will be getting into that. And good morning to those who are joining us, those of you who've become regulars, as well as those who are joining us for the first time. So these live streams we're doing every weekday at 9:15 have been now for this is our ninth week. And our aim is to cut through all of those swathes of information that are coming at you every 24 hours as business owners and staff to try and make sense of them for you in terms of how they impact you and what your obligations are, as well as to discuss specific topics that we think are on the agenda, particularly because of things that might be happening or where we get requests from our clients and our audience to cover particular areas. So thank you so much for joining us, and please ask us any questions that you might have as we go along. Pop them in the chat screen, and we will definitely aim to answer them during the session. Otherwise, I might have to take them on notice and answer them on Monday. But feel free to ask away. That's what we're here for, and we've had some very interesting, diverse, challenging scenarios and questions and so forth that have thrown themselves up in the last 9 weeks, not surprisingly. So the learnings that we take from that and the strategies that we're helping businesses to put in place with those things, we're sharing as much as we can, obviously de-identified, but sharing so that everybody can benefit from those learnings. So I've got some examples again today that I'm going to talk to you about in the context of the what if it's all too hard question. So outside of popping any questions up on the chat screen, you can get in touch with us anytime via Facebook, email, or telephone, website. There's a whole range of different channels that you can use to get access to us. So I'm sure my team are going to pop those contact details up for you shortly in the chat screen. Bless them, they are just legends. And we couldn't do what we do if we weren't such a fantastic team altogether. So I just want to publicly acknowledge that. I feel very blessed, and yeah. So shout out to all of my guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So we always start every live stream with breaking news or changes that have come about since the previous 24 hours. So there are, of course, the big thing on people's sort of minds, I think, and agendas, etc. For today, particularly if you're living in New South Wales, is the easing of restrictions that are coming in New South Wales from today. So just to cover off some of the main things with those. What exercise can I do? So boot camps, team sports and play dates are back on. You can now have outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people. Walking, running or training with another person has been permitted this entire time, but you can now swim laps in outdoor pools or use public exercise equipment as well. My advice would be to practice very safe hygiene with that. Take wipes with you, wipe everything down, that kind of stuff. Also good news for parents and kids as playgrounds are now open again. If you think about the numbers of little mitts that are going to be on those sorts of things, take some sanitizing equipment with you would be my suggestion. Not here to give you advice around that, of course, but that would be my suggestion. So one of the biggest questions has been, can I go to the pub? Can I eat out? So you will now be able to, from today in New South Wales, eat inside restaurants and cafes, but only 10 people at a time will be allowed. That doesn't include serving staff. So, however, those venues are still required to, and so are we who frequent the venues, to stick to social distancing rules by ensuring a 4 metre squared distance around patrons. So the Premier's reminded us yesterday to call ahead and make bookings and try and refrain from lining up outside venues because it'll have to be 1.5 metres per person. And the last thing you want to do is get the disease or spread the disease as you're waiting in a queue for service or to purchase something. So pubs and clubs with dining areas fall into this category too. Some are deciding not to open at this point in time because 10 customers is not enough for them to actually be able to be viable. But others are starting to reopen. So unfortunately, being able to meet up with some mates at the pub and sink a few beers is not yet allowed. So obviously venues like some pubs and definitely clubs with multiple bar and dining spaces won't be viable and will likely choose not to open, which is what we've already seen from a number of organisations. And because it's only up to 10 people in one venue, even if there's multiple rooms or multiple facilities, it's still 10 people per venue. So that's an important clarification. Can you go to church? The good news there for churchgoers is that up to 10 people can congregate together for religious worship, including inside churches, mosques and synagogues. Weddings can now accommodate up to 13 people in total, which is 10 guests plus a celebrant and a happy couple. However, the rules are slightly less strict for funerals. So you're allowed to have 20 mourners in attendance if you have the funeral inside and 30 mourners if it's outside. Can I have people over? That's another big question that has come up. And the good news is that small dinner parties are back on as the number of visitors that we're allowed to have in our homes are lifted. So you'll remember that from the end of April in New South Wales, we were allowed to have 2 adults and their children visit a home. As of today, we can have up to 5 visitors of any age in another household. But if you've got, if you're 2 parents with 4 children, you'd need to leave one of the kids at home. So it's more important than ever, however, and I think this is really important to emphasise, is that we maintain social distancing, because that means staying 1.5 metres away from each other and avoiding physical contact. So you cannot hug these visitors. You cannot get within 1.5 metres of them. This is how this disease is going to uptick again and spread. So it's incredibly important that we are disciplined and vigilant. Our instincts may well be to throw a hand out for a shake or embrace with a hug. We just cannot do that at this point in time without really putting the risk level significantly higher. So I know that's hard, but just try and do that. There is no limit on how far in New South Wales people can travel to visit friends or family, woohoo, as long as they stay within state lines. So no boundary hopping at this point in time. Can I go on holidays? The answer to that is still no. People in New South Wales are still not allowed to travel for a holiday, but this is certainly in line for review, so the Premier says. We'd like to see intrastate travel, so within New South Wales, the Premier has said. But once you allow that, there's no reason why you can't allow interstate. So that's why they're just monitoring that quite carefully. All right. So obviously, our health authorities have stressed that coronavirus cases are going to increase as restrictions are eased across the state. It doesn't mean the virus doesn't exist anymore. It just means that there's more room for us in the ICU if we need it. So we really do need to stay vigilant in terms of hand hygiene, social distancing, all of those things that we have been so good about putting into place. We have seen significantly decreasing daily infection rates for the last month. But complacency on our part means that that those infections are likely to surge again. When we're out and about, we need to assume that we've got the virus and so is everybody else, and behave accordingly. So yeah, just remember that. The other significant change in the last 24 hours is changes to workers' compensation regulations in New South Wales. So what's happened is that nurses, paramedics, teachers, and other workers deemed essential workers will no longer have to prove they were infected with COVID-19 at work in order to make a workers' comp claim. That's a big change. New South Wales Parliament passed an amendment to the workers' compensation laws for New South Wales on Wednesday. It means that those workers deemed and defined as essential will no longer have to prove that they were not infected with the virus at the shops or family or somewhere else in the community. The changes are going to be covering all workers in industries including health, education, hospitality, entertainment, construction, and retail. Obviously we've had, Nurses and Midwives Association and relevant unions be clear that they're very pleased with those outcomes. However, understandably, small businesses, which is our area of specialty, are worried about insurance premiums, because if your workers' comp insurance premiums are more than $30,000 a year, every time you have a workers' compensation claim that has lost time attached to it, it's going to impact your premiums. Talk to us if you have concerns about that, or if you're in one of those areas, essential worker areas that were identified for those changes that have come in on Wednesday, and what that means in terms of your workers' compensation and your work health and safety obligations, which I've talked about the last 2 mornings. Happy to answer questions about that. Give us a call. We can chew over what is going to be relevant for you and the things that you need to be really mindful of. Okay, so let's come to today's fundamental question, which was the reason for today's topic: what if it's all too hard? Now, I thought the best way to kind of answer this question, and what if it's all too hard can mean lots of different things to lots of different business owners, but I thought I might give you some examples. I think when you tell de-identified stories about other businesses' experience, it's probably the most relatable way to think about your own experience. Of course, remembering in all of this, you can ring us and set up a time, which we could do pretty quickly, and have a chat. There is no obligation in that first conversation. What we find is that more than half of businesses in that first conversation get the information and the advice and guidance they need, and off they go. And they can handle things from there. It won't cost you anything to have that conversation. So if that would be beneficial for you, just to chew the fat, work out where you're at, what the things are that you might need to do, get in touch with us. We'd be more than happy to help you with that. So let's talk about some examples of what if it's all too hard. The first is an example of a business that has restructured in the last couple of months and continues to pivot over this period of time. So in this case, this organisation is a trades business. It had already had consultation with its staff and reduced its workforce in response to drought impacts. Drought and bushfires have provided untold challenges for regionally based small to medium enterprises and not-for-profit organisations, and COVID on top of that has just been a nightmare for a lot of businesses. But that's what we're here for, is to walk at an appropriate social distance beside you and work with you, hand in hand, figuratively speaking, with you and your staff to do things that need to be done to help your business. So in this case, we'd already helped the organisation to restructure. It had to lose a staff member in response to drought and bushfire. When COVID hit, we went into another period of consultation, and don't think that this sounds like something that has to take weeks. It can literally take hours or days, but you've got to go through a process, and that's appropriate. And so we did a consultation process with the staff, met with them, said, guys, listen, business is tanking. Not surprisingly, with a lot of service businesses, you've got people making practical decisions about whether or not they can put food on the table, as opposed to whether or not they can, afford to get their car serviced, for example. And the food is going to take priority, right? So service businesses have been incredibly largely hit with this. So this was starting to become evident very quickly in this particular business. So we got together with the staff, said, look, this is what's happening. We had frequent communication with the staff over that next few weeks to see, just what bookings were going to look like and so forth. In the end, we ended up needing to make 2 positions redundant, and to stand down most of the staff. Now, this was pre-JobKeeper, so this was under the stand down provisions in the Fair Work Act. What's happened since then? And only a couple of staff were retained to continue to work in that particular instance. What's happened since then is that work has upticked again, and the business has been able to gradually return some staff that were stood down, but we're still looking at the potential redundancy of others, depending on to what extent business picks up and how long it takes. It looks like this business will be eligible for JobKeeper, but of course that's all paid in arrears, and so cash flow is king. These are real concerns and issues that this particular organisation has. So this is a watching brief. This organisation, it has now changed its structure a number of times in the last 6 months, and we will continue to talk with staff, keep them informed about what's happening, answer their questions, help the business to plan literally from one week to the next. So that was one business that we've been working with. What if it's all too hard? Another example of a business that we've worked with or are working with is an example of a business that's had to temporarily downsize. Now, it may need to permanently downsize too. That is a watching state of affairs at the moment with COVID. So with this particular business, again, most importantly, consultation with staff from the outset. So as soon as as the business could see that bookings and so forth were dropping off, we got the staff together and said, right, this is what things are looking like. As it turns out, winter is a time of year when, for this particular business, patronage tends to drop off a bit. So this was a double effect. But we talked to the staff, said, look, at this stage it doesn't look like we're going to be able to keep this payroll. Certainly not for the next few months at the very least. Can you come and talk to us about things that you might be prepared to do to help us? Now, bless this particular business, as with the one that I mentioned a moment ago, who's restructured it a couple of times already. This particular business has an incredibly good workplace culture and staff that have worked with them for quite some time. And so staff came forward and said, listen, this company's been really good to me. These are the kinds of things I could potentially offer to do. And what happened as a consequence of those discussions is, and the forecast for the business in the coming months was, they ended up having to make 1 position redundant. There was no way around that, unfortunately. They literally just couldn't make the numbers work. So they went through a fair and equitable process of working out, what position that would be. And they also came to an agreement individually with staff members, the remaining staff members, to reduce their work days and hours back from, in some cases from part-time to a smaller part-time, and in other cases from full-time to 4 days a week. And that was put in place for 3 months initially, and contract variations were done for each of those staff members. Now, interestingly, this was a mutual negotiation that needed to be agreed between staff and the business for it to come into effect. It had nothing to do with JobKeeper. So this was not a JobKeeper enabling direction. This was the company getting together and saying, guys, we've got a number of options. talk to us about what might be feasible for you. So what we've done is put changes in place, contract changes, to staff for 3 months. So those reductions are happening for a 3-month period. We've scheduled to review at the 2-month mark, and we may need to extend or seek to vary contracts further. And again, that will be, unless the company is eligible, which it looks like it will be for JobKeeper, but once we get that confirmation, we'll know. But in the meantime, we'll need mutual agreement, and would seek that anyway, I think, in terms of the staff to vary their employment contracts. In the meantime, while we're doing that, it's a watching brief and helping the company prepare and respond to market conditions. That company has also been particularly vigilant about managing its health and safety risks for staff too. And I can't stress that highly enough, having done the last 2 days sessions on this. So with that particular business, it's been temporarily downsizing. It's obviously had to do a permanent downsize in terms of losing one full-time equivalent position out of that company. We're hoping that in making these changes for a temporary period, that will actually make the cash flow situation be something that is sustainable for a period. But it's a watching brief, and we're talking to staff regularly, and we will, be making suggestions about variations to things as and when we need to, depending on what's happening with business demand. The next example that I wanted to talk to you about with the question, what if it's all too hard, is we helped a cafe proprietor close recently. Now, this was after a period of attempting to adapt to the public health orders. So we were providing support to this organisation from the get-go, and by that I mean from the time when the public health orders said, can't do seated dining anymore. This particular cafe, so we got together with the staff really quickly, made changes to duties with the agreement of the staff. Mind you, they also had employment contracts in place that said that they could change duties if that was necessary, so that was really helpful. Again, going back to my session, I think it was on Monday this week, which was position descriptions and employment contracts, why bother? Incredibly important reasons to bother, not the least of which you've got lawful obligations around the information you need to give your staff and you need to maintain about your staff. But so this is a classic example where changes to duties were possible. We talked to staff about that, and those changes to duties came about because this business pivoted initially to only do takeaway and delivery. So they were able to they had to stand some staff down, and they were able to put some others on takeaway and delivery functions, some others in the kitchen. But again, had to make sure that they didn't put people into areas where they didn't hold the necessary certifications or those sorts of things. So we walked them through all of that, did all of the correspondence for them, and obviously were an integral part of advising them and consulting with their staff. So they sought an overdraft extension in order to survive, because their takeaway and delivery business was not what the cash flow had provided from seated dining previously. They negotiated rental relief with their landlord. Unfortunately, due to having, which is not uncommon in cafe situations, they have had a high turnover of casual staff. So they've got limited access to JobKeeper. Even with seated dining being reintroduced, and they're a New South Wales business, so from today in a regional area, the business is just not viable moving forward. And even before we knew that these restrictions were going to be relaxed today, they knew that if that was the relaxation point and the 4 metre squared rule was going to come into place, that this particular business was not going to be viable moving forward. So we have moved to make those staff that were stood down redundant. So that was 2 staff who had over 12 months service. The company was under a 15 head count, so therefore a small business under the Fair Work Act. So there was no redundancy pay as such that needed to be paid, just notice of termination for staff where notice was required to be advised. So we've made sure that together with that business, that it's met all of its obligations. We've also provided support to the staff whose jobs have ceased to exist through this process, which we're doing with every client where this is the case. We're working with those staff to try and find them an alternative employment as well. So that's an additional part of the wraparound service that we provide to businesses where they do need to restructure and where there are staff losses. The other area in this last bit of time for this morning that I want to cover off is the question of whether you might be having to contemplate selling your business if you think that there is actually a market for the sale of your business, or whether indeed you might be in the market to buy a business. And there are sectors of the economy that are ramping up. So we've had inquiries in respect of both of those things. So in terms of selling or buying a business, you do have transfer of business obligations. So you must have all your ducks in a row from a work health and safety and HR perspective, including all of your record keeping. And you must know and be mindful and pay out all of your relevant entitlements if you're selling a business. This is a very serious undertaking in terms of your transfer of business obligations. And if you haven't had your record keeping up to date lawfully to this point in time, that is all going to have to be up to date, and everything in very good working order and records and all of those things to transfer to any new business owner. If you're looking to buy a business, the same applies in reverse, as well as doing things like paying particular attention to the question of continuity of service obligations. So where you might employ or take on staff associated with the buying of a new business, it's incredibly important that you write to them to specifically advise that their service with the previous employer doesn't count for service with you as the new employer, because the default position is that it will, unless you write to advise otherwise. So these are the kinds of little quirky, curly, tricky things that apply in selling or buying businesses that a lot of people don't realise when they go into this process. So we might actually even schedule the topic. Next week's topics are pretty much lined up, but we might for the week after to actually deal specifically with transfer of business in terms of buying and selling. This is also, interestingly, particularly relevant to those who might have company structures where they might actually be looking to close one arm, move staff to another arm, that sort of thing. Effectively, a transfer of business involves, if you've got the employment of an employee of the old employer that employment has terminated, within 3 months of that termination with the old employer, the employee becomes employed by a new employer. The work that the person is doing, the transferring work as it's referred to in the Act, is the same or substantially similar to the work they were doing for the previous person. And at least one of the following connections exists between the two employers. So an arrangement that the new employer owns or has use of some or all of the old employee's assets in relationship to the transferred work. The work the employee does is outsourced by the old employer to the new employer. Or the work previously outsourced is insourced. So this is where you have to be really careful that you meet your transfer of business obligations if you've got associated entities in company structures. And that's relative to the meanings of those entities under the Corporations Act. So this starts to get a little bit messy and complicated. But it's incredibly important to get advice. If you're looking to try and sell your business or to buy a business, your transfer of business obligations from the employment side are going to be particularly significant, and you need to be really mindful of it. There are provisions around the employee entitlements in a transfer of business. Service with the old employer will automatically count as service with the new employer, unless the new employer is not an associated entity of the old employer. So where you have associated entities, there's no way of getting around that service counting between one and the next. If, however, the entities are not related at all, and it's a sale or a transfer of a business where there's no relationship, then the new employer might decide that they don't want to recognise a transferring employee's previous accumulated service, either for annual leave or redundancy pay. Which are both entitlements under the National Employment Standards. So if the service isn't recognised, importantly, if you're buying a business, it's incredibly important to discuss this, because that is one area that you need to make sure you've covered off. So if, as the new employer, you're not going to be recognising service, which, unless there are particular reasons why you would, then my advice would be that you don't. The old employer then may be under an obligation to pay the affected employees their accrued entitlements, so annual leave or redundancy. If somebody has received entitlements based on service from an old employer, that service is not counted again in determining entitlements with the new employer. Again, this has got lots of horns and complexities in it. And so we might do a special topic, actually. I think now I'm even more convinced now we should do a separate topic on transfer of business. So because the other thing you need to do is that if you are buying or selling a business, you need to make sure, as the selling entity, that all of your recorded obligations are available and transferred to the new employer. You have to have maintained an employment record for each transferring employee, and you need to provide that record in full as part of the transfer of assets. In the case of you selling a business, you need to provide those records. If you're buying a business, you need to make sure that those records are part of that sale. Okay, so that's probably it for today. So one of the questions that we had that I held over, I kind of part answered it on Wednesday, and then I've held it over since, is what if we're allowed to reopen with restrictions, which is kind of what's facing a lot of hospitality businesses and retail today, but still doing so is still not viable. So one of those reasons might be you're a pub with several sort of indoor locations, but you can still only have 10 people with 4 metres squared. And it might be that it's just not viable to reopen your premises for that purpose. What the questions that we've had, which are multitudinal, but this one is, can I keep a staff member on stand down non-job keeper? So that's where there's a stoppage of work for which the employer is not responsible. If there's no longer a stoppage of work, so there's an option to reopen, but it's not financially viable. There's a question as to whether you'd be able to keep somebody on stand down. We may have to progress to a redundancy, or more than one redundancy of people that you just can't bring in. We'd need to talk with you about where the situation is, and we would have strongly advised you to get to that position with your accountant, and to be really clear about whether this is part of a transition that you can't reopen now, but you could hang on for another couple of months and hope we're at stage 3, where it might be that you could have up to 100 people in a venue. So it will depend is the answer to that question. If it's just not viable and it's not going to be viable, you can't hang on for when it might become a reality, then we would be looking at redundancies. And so and all of the relevant attendant consultation and redundancy obligations that you would have around that. So that's one of the questions that we've had. I notice we haven't had any more in the chat screen this morning. So any questions that you have, though, after this, don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we're more than happy to answer those. Ring up and make a time for a non-obligation, chat about where your business is at and what your options might be. Very happy to do that also. We also have package services available, and that information is up on our website. Everything is entirely fit for purpose for each individual business. So at minimum, we make sure that you're covering all your obligations, but more importantly, I think, beyond that, is making sure that the services and advice and support that you get is entirely relevant to your particular business, industry, circumstances, etc. So don't hesitate to reach out. In the meantime, get advice and plan. Make sure that there's every chance that you don't know what you don't know. in terms of particularly your employment obligations. We find that often with small businesses, and that is not a criticism. It's just that there's so much regulation and obligation that you have that it's important for you to at least have access to the advice that can help you with that. So get advice and plan, have good, robust processes in place when you're going through any of these things with your business. You do not want to heighten your risk even further by, having the risks of unfair dismissal or, adverse action claims because you went through a process that didn't result in a genuine redundancy, for example. Communicate with your staff frequently and regularly. Really, really important. And be vigilant. Please be vigilant, and ask us. Just give a call and chew things over. It's entirely commercial in confidence, but it just might make the difference for you, and it can happen very quickly. So these are not things that have to take you forever, cost you a fortune, and mean that you're stuck in the mire. We can get things to pivot and move very, very quickly for you. So thank you so much. Again, for joining us today. We are very delighted that you have. We hope you found today's discussion really helpful to you. If this or any of our other discussions have been particularly helpful for you, please let your colleagues and friends know. Please share it. These live streams are recorded every day, and they're up on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, also up on our website. So you can, there's a whole library there of information that you can go back and have a look at and get access to. If you've got specific questions about your business or you would like us to help you or talk you through things, contact us anytime in the contact details that my lovely team have put up for you there in the chat screen. On Monday, I'll be talking about working from home. So a lot of you as business owners and staff will have been in this situation now for a month or two, potentially. My question to business owners is, do you know how it's going? And what are your risks and opportunities? One of the other questions we're being asked is, what if my staff asked to keep doing it post-COVID? All very sensible, topical questions. So that's Monday's topic. So please join us. If you think that topic is going to be of particular interest to any of your colleagues or friends, please share this with them so that they can also join us. In the meantime, please hug the people that you can. Don't hug the people that you shouldn't. As much as I know you want to, please don't do that. Wave cheerily at people that you'd love to hug that you can't at this point in time. And please remember that while you can have more people over and you can be out and about with more people, you can't hug them. Please stay 1.5 meters apart and let's keep these virus infections as low as we can. So stay safe, stay home unless you really need to be out and about. Wash your hands, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll really look forward to seeing you Monday. Thank you so much for joining us again this morning.